Okay, we're live.
Thank you. Welcome and good afternoon, everybody. Buenos dias, buenas tardes. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on Share Your Story, Communicate Effectively with Journalists, organized by the Indigenous Journalists Association and Grist, with the support from Project Access Indigenous Partnership, Cultural Survival, and Canadian Commission UNESCO. My name is Diana Pastor. I am Maya Quiche, and I am the Media Coordinator for Cultural Survival, and I have the pleasure of introducing this webinar. So for some housekeeping, this event is being live streamed on Cultural Survival's Facebook and YouTube page, and is being recorded and will be posted on partner websites. The interpretation is available in Spanish, French, and Russian. To access, please click on the glow icon on the bottom navigation bar to choose your language. Hay interpretación disponible en español, francés y ruso. Para acceder, por favor, haga clic en el icono de globo terráqueo en la barra de navegación inferior para elegir su idioma. We want to know who you are, so it will be great if you can drop your name, your community, the organization, or the country in the chat. So we will be happy to read that. And the Q&A will take place at the end of the presentation. So please use this function for asking questions. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for today. So Tristan Aton is a member of the Kiowa tribe and is editor-at-large at Grist. He previously served as editor-in-chief at the Texas Observer and Indigenous Affairs editor at High Country News. He has reported for Al Jazeera America, PBS NewsHour, Indian Country Today, and NPR, to name a few. Aton's stories have won multiple honors, including a George Polk Award, a National Magazine Award nomination, and investigative awards from the Gannett Foundation and investigative reporters and editors. He is a former president of the Native American Journalists Association and a 2017 Nieman Fellow. So the space is yours, Tristan. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Diana, and thank you everybody for being here. I know there are a lot of things going on with Permanent Forum coming up in a few weeks, and your general day-to-day schedules are likely jam-packed, but if working with journalists and engaging with media is part of your communication strategy, then we think you're going to be happy with this compact session this afternoon. So this training is designed to help individuals and organizations find their voice and bring their messages and ideas to the public conversation through journalists. What we want to do is work with you to craft messaging that reaches audiences clearly and succinctly, and put you in a position to feel more in control of that messaging. So today you'll be hearing from two excellent journalists about some tips and tricks that you should be aware of when working with reporters. This web training is kind of a sample of what we'll be doing in a full day session during the UN Permanent Forum, which involves workshopping pitches with trainers and even role-playing pitching journalists. We'll have more information at the end of the session as well for signups. The big thing that we really want to get across here this afternoon is sort of the notion that advocacy and journalism really share a concern with change and impact. When you are an advocate, a lawyer, a leader, a scientist, a communications person, you need to get your message across effectively to really make the change that you're looking to make. And I think the journalists here today really share those interests in many ways, and similarly are eager to work with people who are effective communicators to find stories. So they also have years of experience working on all kinds of stories from across the world. Generally, we tend to think that great communicators aren't born, they're made. But the way most people learn to communicate is very different than the way reporters take in and sort of process information and behave to some degree. For instance, journalists are professional question askers. and we like to get to the point quickly. Many of you have likely interacted with reporters, and it may be frustrating to speak with reporters because we want to get to the core of what you're telling us very fast, often without the background or context that you think are necessary to get to that point. We want to know what's the bottom line, what's the story. Journalists can also often be a reality check on what you think is important. Not every story is going to go into print. And sometimes the focus on what you wanted to get out can completely change when you're speaking with a reporter. But importantly, journalists are really trained to sort of seek the larger sort of like social context. We look for a lot of specific elements before committing to a story, but we always have to think about how we reach audiences of all stripes. So with that in mind, this training is designed to help you think about the kinds of things reporters look for so you can better craft your messaging and work with journalists. So I'll sort of turn it over to our panel here to start the conversation and let folks introduce themselves. So Angel, can I ask you to introduce yourself first? And can I also ask you to sort of address a general sort of question in your introduction about what you generally focus on in your work and why?
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming today. And my name is Angel Moore. I'm in Canada. I'm from the prairies. My family's community is Peguis First Nation. That's a Cree Nation in Manitoba. But I live and work in Atlantic Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm a video journalist with APTN, Aboriginal Peoples Television Network. We have a national newscast every day. I cover the Atlantic region and Labrador, quite a few nations. So APTN covers, it's all Indigenous stories, and we're Indigenous-owned television network. The stories I cover, like what Tristan said, I look for stories because we're national news and international, so we have partners with other outlets. Are issues that impact people on the ground in the community, but have a national and international issues, so to speak. So I'm very, APTN focuses on people in communities and their lives and that are impacted directly, whether it's government announcements, which is very big right now, obviously. So that's the aspect that I cover from the community level and how it impacts nationally and internationally.
Great. And Graham, to you, also same question.
Oseo Nagad, my name is Graham Brewer. I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation. I live in Oklahoma, and I'm a national writer for the Associated Press on the race and ethnicity desk. I cover primarily Indian country here in the United States, but also cover a variety of other ways that right now, especially in the new Trump administration, where race and ethnicity has become unfortunately a focal point of a lot of policy. So I don't just specifically cover Native communities, but that's my primary focus. I don't typically, even though I do a lot of things that touch the federal government, I don't typically like to do process reporting. I'm more interested in reporting on the ground from Native communities and trying to find voices and communities that don't typically get either get ignored by the press or stereotyped by them when they are covered. And so try to do real three-dimensional on the ground reporting that is representative of the Native communities that I cover. I've been at the AP for about a year, and for that I worked at NBC News for a few years, also covering Indian country, and then previously with Tristan at High Country News on the Indigenous Affairs desk there. So including Indigenous voices and perspectives and worldviews in my reporting is something that's been really important to me for a number of years now, and my primary focus as a journalist. So,
Right. I think one of the things I'd like to start out by sort of talking about is that I think people tend to sort of have different images of what journalists do during the day. That we're just chasing stories all day or we're writing all day. So Graham, I'll start with you. Maybe you can just talk me through like what does a day and like what does a work day look like for you generally?
Sure. Yeah, generally I'm trying to write. I'm lucky I'm not a journalist that's on a daily deadline. At the Associated Press, we have tons and tons of journalists that work particularly in state houses in all 50 states, that are churning out, and especially those who are covering the federal government in DC that are, churning out daily stories, sometimes multiple stories a day. I'm on a national desk, so I typically try to write like 1 to 2 stories a week or every couple weeks. But even though I'm constantly working on these shorter stories, in the background, I'm working on these longer ones that sometimes take months, or just several weeks to confirm. And we also, the AP has been really pivoting now towards digital storytelling. So trying to do very like video focused stories. And so a lot of the time these longer ones take a long time because we actually travel to a lot of the locations. I'm also fortunate that I have a travel budget and can be on the ground for a lot of this kind of reporting because that's really important. But yeah, it's a lot of day to day is a lot of phone calls, a lot of sometimes reading research papers or previous coverage, or even books to understand that one of the challenging things about being a journalist is that even if you might have an expertise in a particular field, you're constantly confronted with things you have to write about that you might not know very much about on the surface. And so a lot of times it's trying to figure out who the right experts are, calling them, getting their perspectives to help inform you. And then sometimes even having to put in records requests for documents, things like that. But I'd say just on a general level, when I'm not on a deadline and writing, most of my time is spent just calling people and talking to them and asking them about their work or their lives, and then trying to read as much as I can to kind of confirm those facts.
And Angel, same question. I guess what does a general sort of day look like when you're at work?
Well, being a video journalist, I do have daily deadlines for our newscast. So I'm a one-person show, and for television news, I do everything. So the day will start out, usually spend a day on a story, gathering people to speak with. And if there's a lot of research, I have to research. Every story I do is like writing a research essay, to make sure all the facts are verified. And that also helps too, doing the research, that also helps to see maybe a different aspect, and you might discover something else that's part of the story. So when I'm going out to shoot, I jump in the car and go to the location, and I have the tripod and camera, and I'm the only person filming, which I think really puts people at ease, instead of having like a camera person sort of standing back there, the silent person. So I really like doing my own filming. So I do the filming of the location, which is important, the scenery, people in action, or if something is happening. And then taking the time to interview people. Usually for a news story, it's 2 to 3 minutes. So it's usually 2 or 3 people that is required for the interview. And I'm running around with the tripod and get back in the van and come back to the bureau. As you can see behind me, I have to transcribe all the interviews, and I write the script. My producer vets it, and I do the voiceover and the editing of all the video, and send it to Winnipeg, is where our headquarters is located, the main studio. I also write the web article, and while I'm on location, I'm taking photos as well. And after the TV story is sent to Winnipeg via a cable line, a magic line. I'm not sure how that works. And then I write the web article with the web producer and post photos online if I have time, but it's usually the next day or so. So it's very intense. It's a lot of running around and demanding, but I certainly love it very much.
So Angel, in your case, you're doing a more or less a story a day on many times, and Graham, you're up to 2 stories a week. But I guess with hundreds of stories that are out there being thrown at you all the time, you're really only able to focus on like a few at a time. So I guess the question here is like, what makes a cut? What makes a good story that you're going to spend your entire 8-hour day, Angel, working on something? What are the elements you're looking for?
A lot of stories that APTN covers, mainstream media does not cover. But a good story is a story that has strong people sharing their story that is impactful and important and relative to people across the country. And actually, everywhere. I think, it's like, how would it impact Indigenous peoples at another location that is relatable and that is understandable? So, if it's about the fishery, really that's about treaty rights and Aboriginal inherent rights, and giving an Aboriginal perspective to a story also that is not included in mainstream media. But a good story is something that's different. A lot of stories kind of might have the same thread if they're climate change or if they're the treaties or if they're laws. But a good story is someone who has been very impacted personally by these issues, and healthcare, like everything, right? We cover everything, every topic. And a good story is where, it touches the heart and that it's personable and important, and it is very significant to everybody else.
Well, you
And a good
mentioned the idea
location
of-
because it's visuals. Yeah, a good location because it's visuals. Yesterday I was filming somebody in their kitchen making tea. You have to make do what you can. But good visuals as well, and people who are interviewing who have the compassion. Absolutely. Sorry.
No, I was actually going to ask you. You mentioned like a story that's important. I mentioned that a couple of times. I mean, how do you gauge importance? What is the rubric you're working with that what is the thing that makes the story cross the line and you say this is important?
For example, I did a story about healthcare where a nurse did not want to go make a house call to a patient because it was an Indigenous community. So that incident shows the impact of the racism in healthcare, which is probably everywhere. And the policies that need to change and the consequences of what happened to that nurse. She had to go for like 3-hour trainings, reconciliation online trainings. The family wanted her to lose her license. The chief of the community, was outraged. And you do a story like that, and it's hard for people to come forward, and it's hard for people to put their face out there, and share everything, right? Very personal information, which takes a lot of courage. And I knew a story like that. Other people see the story and they come forward and connect, reach out to us and say, hey, that happened to me. Even across the country, I've gotten emails from people in the prairies that say, this happened to my family member, or this happened to me, or even the legislation and the practices.
And Graham, to you, when you're looking for stories, I mean, what are some of the like prime elements that you sort of have to have before you even decide to move forward? I think Graham may be frozen. we'll come back to Graham here. Again, Angel, in terms of sort of thinking about, I mean, one of the things that I'm always thinking about when working on stories or editing stories, for instance, is I'm looking at like character. I'm looking at people who are like doing something. I'm looking for, making sure that people are sort of like dealing with, like, there's a difference between topic and there's a difference between story, right? Like there are, there's a story about racism in the medical field versus a story about, a medical worker who's engaging in racist practices, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference sort of between like topic and story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's just it. A lot of people do reach out to me about a topic. But a story would be, in my opinion, the impacts of a person, of a community, of that topic. And people who have experiences, direct experiences from that topic. Like, racism in healthcare is a topic, but that story I did about the nurse and the family, her father had to be taken to hospital, and that was the last thing he wanted. He was in palliative care. So the family was outraged. So the topic, is racism in healthcare, but the story is the impact, the personal impact of the racism in that healthcare, and the personal impact and consequences, and then the consequences of did the government change their health practices? Did that nurse get fired? Were charges laid? And how the family and how the community is moving forward to prevent this from happening again, which, they're hiring their own healthcare workers. If that's clear.
And yeah, I mean, I think there's also, I think for folks that are on the call here, is that like, when you're dealing with reporters, you're dealing with folks that some people are writing feature stories, some people are writing quick news stories. To the moderators, it looks like Graham is back in here. You can let him in, but I guess in terms of like longer stories and even quick turn news stories, like what are sort of are there any differences in terms of like when you were thinking about story and what to pursue between those two things?
APTN is wonderful because we're very flexible. I've done some stories that were in 3 parts, and 5 minutes long. So we do longer stories. And then it depends, you can start a story and then more information is revealed, and you cannot possibly put it in 2 minutes. So we do follow-ups, and it does depend. I did want to mention one thing though, when we're talking about topics and a story. What happens to me a lot is a press release is not a story. A lot of times I'll get a press release about an event happening, and then there's comments from, the main characters, maybe the chief, a politician, and the director of an agency. This happened, $2 million was donated to, education, language education in the schools and communities. And, they had this big gathering with kids, and then I get the press statement the day after it's happened. So for communications people, it's good to reach out to reporters before the event happens. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk a little bit more about that, especially with press releases. Especially, I think a lot of the folks that are probably on the call here have tried to send out press releases or tried to drum up support for things that they're working on. In terms of like, when does a press release become useful to you?
A press release comes useful, for the example with education and community for, Indigenous languages teachings. The announcement is gone. We can't report. It's after the fact. So what we would do is a follow up, and then I would go to the school and I would go to the classroom, and show the children learning their language, and speak to the people maybe that were in the press release. Usually in press releases, it's the same characters, like they're all leaders, you know, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and government, non-Indigenous government leaders. So, like I said, we like showing the impacts in the community. So, I mean, it would be good to be at the press release event as well. But if it's after the fact, we follow it up into the community, which I think is more important anyways, and more relevant to our viewers, you know.
I mean, on my end, I mean, I think for Grist, for instance, it is very rare that we take a press release or do stories on press releases. I would say 95% of the press releases that come in, even in their areas that we cover, we actually don't go for them. And I think one of the primary reasons is they don't give us enough time to report it ahead of time.
Yeah.
B, as you mentioned, they come out the day of, so there's nothing that we can cover. We can't switch off like what we're already working on and switch gears all of a sudden. I mean, what is most useful for you when, you know, press releases come in? Like, is there time? Is there language? What helps?
Well, you know, what would help incredibly is advance notice of the press release. If it's an event, you know, if it's an event, is advance notice. And sometimes a press release is just a press release, and you're right, there's nothing there. All it is information for a follow-up story, you know, in the community. So, you know, and contacts. But yeah, reporting from a press release is not really something that we do.
I guess in terms of like when you are looking at, you're dealing with press releases coming in, you're dealing with your sort of like daily grind reporting stuff. I mean, what are some of the pressures that you have during the day when it comes to sort of like dealing with your work? Is it like, do you have editors on your back? Do you have readers? Like, what are some of the daily pressures that influence your decision making?
Absolutely. The daily influence is time, and all of my stories have to be approved by my producer, which is an editor, which is probably common for, I think, all reporters. And we discuss the topic. And because our resources are so low, because APTN's Indigenous owned, you know, we have to sort of balance and figure out what we can do and what we can't do, which is very difficult. Another challenge is when I interview people, you know, for television, it's only a few comments that we use, and people will say, you know, we'll talk and tell great information. And I'm very transparent with people how we work. And you know, I tell people I can only use a little bit of what you're saying, even though it was great. And you know, that's difficult too. But when we're interviewing, you know, we're very respectful for people, and if people want to talk, we don't cut them off. We don't just go in with a microphone and have fast answers or anything. Like, you know, people are sharing their stories, which is respectful. So time is a main issue, and resources is a main issue. There's just some stories that we cannot get to. Another main issue is when you're interviewing a person, and this happened to me a couple of days ago, they're not on time, and you have to wait. And if that happens, you may lose another interview, or the reporter just might have to leave. Yeah, but ABTN's wonderful. My producer is wonderful. It's a team effort, even though I'm out here by myself in Atlantic Canada. But it's definitely a team effort, you know, with my producers and editors. Absolutely.
Graham, now that you're back on, same question from earlier to you, sort of what you're looking for in a story, and maybe to dovetail with what Angel was just talking about. Obviously, you're looking for particular stories, but then you're having to sort of sell it up the chain to additional editors, you know, supervisors, etc. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're looking for, and then what you have to bring to your editors to make that story like have legs.
Yeah, I mean, I think personally for me, the most important factor is the potential impact that the story could have. So or how illuminating it could be. So if there's the potential for if my reporting to um, create more public awareness about a particular issue, that the issue could change for the better, then I'm much more likely to want to report about it. And obviously, while I think reporting on that impact for small communities is super important part of my job, the more amount of people that would be impacted by the issue, I think a lot of climate stories would fall into that category where it affects everyone. And So that's one, like I said, something that's very illuminating. Like character-driven stories are fun. I think maybe it's helpful to keep in mind too that journalists like to write, and we like to meet interesting people and talk about their lives and write about them for other people to see what their lives are like. So while I've, like I said, my main goal is to have a positive impact on the communities that I cover, and the issues that are important to them. I also uh, like to tell those stories through interesting characters. And then in terms of selling it to my editor, while those two things are both really important, something else that is kind of the coin of the realm when it comes to speaking with your editors is exclusivity. So if you have something, an important piece of information, maybe that's going to become public soon, or you know about something that the press has not covered at all, if you have some kind of access that you can offer me ahead of time exclusively, um, then that is a much easier sell to my editors, because the li literally like seconds matter in the news world about how quickly a story is broken. Like just to give you a for instance, if the Associated Press where I work were to get a breaking news story out of the White House, like 30 seconds, 60 seconds online faster than the Washington Post or the New York Times, the internet traffic is going to drive directly to the Associated Press rather than those other places. So for them, getting more eyeballs on their work is a really important metric of their jobs. And so if you're able to give me a heads up or an exclusive on something, I'm much more likely to publish on it.
I want to address a couple of questions that are coming in from audience, and without getting into the specifics on some of the questions, I want to just address that there are a lot of questions that are around sort of how journalists work, but more importantly, sort of distrust in media. And both of you all as Indigenous reporters, perhaps you can talk a little bit about like why Indigenous people are often so upset with reporting, how that impacts your work, and basically how you are navigating sort of that colonial history of like really poor reporting in Indigenous communities, and how it's working. Graham, I'll start with you there.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. The Cherokee Nation, we were the first tribe to have a newspaper, a printed newspaper in the United States, the Cherokee Phoenix. It was restarted a long time ago, and it's operating still today. And certainly when I look at the historical record of the coverage of my ancestors and my tribe through the forced removal Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, where I live today, it's not good. It's furthering racist notions about displacement and genocide, and so for me, writing about these things in honest and truthful ways, and quite frankly, I think uncomfortable ways for a lot of American readers is really important. It's a vital component to what I do, and so I think that's one of the values that I add to the newsroom where I work, is that perspective is very central to the way that I'm focusing on these issues and talking about them. I think there's just so few journalists and newsrooms across the country who identify as Indigenous in the United States, and so it's a really important part of what I do for sure.
And Angel, same to you. I mean, how do you how can you address sort of this historical and rightfully so distrust of media and sort of your place as an Indigenous reporter and how you're navigating that in your work?
Yeah, it happens every day with mainstream media, and I think it's just systemic and colonial systemic practices that is so ingrained. Because Indigenous stories are complex, and they're a lot about and connected to Aboriginal rights, inherent rights, and communities are speaking up about that, and they're aware of their historic rights. So I think mainstream media is unaware, and I think they're learning, but they do get a lot of things wrong, unfortunately. And that's what APTN, our entire network, is working to change. I think it is changing slowly. And I do know reporters in mainstream media, and they're great people, but they have this more hierarchy of editors and producers and publishers, and it's about getting the exposure for the outlet themselves, sometimes getting the hits on social media. So when that happens, I do my best as I can to report stories that counteract the incorrectness in other media. Usually, though, when we do stories, we're doing them, at the same time as mainstream media. It's not like, they're doing a story and then we follow and try to correct it. But in our reporting as Indigenous reporters, we're including the context of the truth, and we're including the context of the story of why it is happening, and the impacts and the consequences from an Indigenous perspective. So for me, in my world, it's a battle every day, and there is a lot of mistrust, and I think rightly so. And it's just the mainstream media works. They have different reporters going around all the time to everybody. There's less or no community connection. So I think they're slowly trying to improve, but that would be a long battle.
Well, in terms of the sort of question here is like how are people heard? How do people get their stories told? Through Indigenous media outlets and reporters like yourselves, and even in mainstream outlets. Obviously, in this session here, we're lucky to have an all Indigenous panel. We specialize in these areas. We look for these kind of stories, but generally, I think participants that are here listening to us are, maybe they'll get folks like us in the future who are already keen to sort of talk to them, but more often than not, they're going to be speaking with non-Indigenous reporters. I guess with that in mind, what are some of the best practices that folks here can employ when speaking with journalists? Are there specific things that they should be thinking about, Indigenous or non-Indigenous journalists, when it comes to like talking to folks and trying to get their story out? Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I get have historically gotten a lot of emails pointing me to specific issues, but the ones that I tend to follow through on are the ones that answer the very first question that I'll have, which is, if you tell me something, how can I prove that? How do you know that? And that's the most important element for the beginning of the conversation, is because I can't print anything that I can't prove, or like at least have several people on the record confirming a story. So of course, introducing me to the issue, I think, is really important. Just getting in touch with us through an email, and being persistent. I sometimes get lots of emails where I'm on like a really tight deadline, or working at the AP. Something that happens to me a lot is something will happen that needs to be turned around really quickly, and I have I either have some kind of expertise that I can lend to that story, or I'm just a reporter that they trust to help gather quotes and stuff. And so I'll have to jump on something and work on a team of people. But if you can show me where I can find the information that will prove what you're saying, or the people that I can talk to who can confirm what you're saying, it eliminates that necessary next step for me, and I can immediately move into proving the claim and seeing if there's merit to the story. And that's when I sell it to my editor. That's when I say, hey, I've got something here that I think actually shows a piece of information that nobody else has, or illuminates a new fold onto an ongoing issue that the public is already paying attention to.
And I guess one more question. I think you were off the call when we talked about it, that idea between topic and story. I mean, to be able to prove that a topic exists is different than proving that there's a story to tell here, and that you need to prove that that story as part of the topic. Can you just briefly say how you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of that is one of the stories that I'm most proud of was when I worked at NBC. I did an investigation into a language nonprofit that was gathering language data, Lakota language data, and printing dictionaries and making a written form of a oral language, and then selling it back to the community. And I think one of the most difficult goals with that story was explaining what Indigenous data sovereignty as a concept is to readers who are completely unfamiliar with that concept, let alone know anything about the community that was being taken advantage of. And so, like, while my main goal with that story, I think, was to investigate the nonprofit, um, introducing that concept, which is really important but undercovered to a broad audience, it was a task in of itself. And so that's kind of where the aforementioned experts and sources that I've talked about kind of come in and helping me explain that. And I think one of the goals, or one of the ways to do that, is also kind of a way that is helpful for me getting a story pitch confirmed with my editor, is explaining these complicated topics in Indigenous communities within a framework that people understand. So, the rules and laws of the of the of the country you live in. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think you're touching on sort of like how you explain these complicated areas, but what makes that different than an academic paper that does the same?
Usually, I mean, I think the simplest answer is putting a human face on a story. Whenever I used to cover the Oklahoma State Capitol, I took over that position from a really seasoned journalist who I really admired and who taught me a lot. Um, but he never really left the building. He was really like a really good process reporter. He knew everything about the state capitol, every player, every bill. But his stories didn't talk to the people who were affected by those laws as much as I thought was necessary. And so I really made it a goal of mine to be outside of that building as much as in, because I wanted to talk to the people who were affected by this. And I really think that that's how, when the average reader is reading a story, that's how they connect to the issue too. If they can see the shared human experience and the person that you're writing about, the issue that you're writing about, I think they're much more likely to feel compelled to do or say something about it.
And I guess, Angel, kicking it over to you. I mean, the importance of character here is, I think, what we're sort of talking about is that you have to have sort of a face on some level to sort of the story, the issue, the topic. I mean, how this is something you obviously also need for television, correct?
Yes. Sometimes too, people will contact me with a great story, but they're not the main character. And then, I say, well, I have to interview this person that is directly impacted or experience, directly impacted, or basically the main character. It might be somebody's friend or mom or relative contacting me and saying, look, this happened to so and so, and this is outrageous. And I'll say, well, will they interview on camera? And they said, well, I don't know. So they're, and then there's a lot, so that takes time, and that's kind of time that could be used more productively when someone approaches you with a story and the main person has no idea that this person's contacted media. So yeah, the main character is of course very, very important, and that's what we have. We have to interview people directly. If I'm interviewing somebody and they say so and so said this, I have to verify that and preferably get that comment from the person directly, and that makes news ethical and responsible reporting, as opposed to reporting hearsay. Also, having a main character, stories come out from some outlets and they're just reporting from social media. Literally, this person said this and then this person said that on whatever social media outlet without directly speaking to the person. We don't do that because I don't think that's good journalism to do that. So the main character is very important, and then maybe you could have someone who knows the main character, who is related or like a close person, but definitely you need the main character that is willing to talk and knows the I don't want to say consequences or risks, but is I inform people coming forward and going out there public with your story. If it's traumatic, you need support after the interview, because that can be traumatizing all over again. Rightly so, it usually is. And also, people, the main character needs to think about, does their family know, or close friends, close circle of people know that they're going to go forward. So the main character, it's a bit of a weight to carry to tell their story, but they also need to be reliable for the interview and very okay with coming forward.
There have been a couple of questions about risks, and I want to get back to that with both of y'all in a few minutes. But I also want to bring up something that you mentioned here, Angel, sort of the both sides and sort of in your reporting. This is something that's come up a number of times in some of our reporting, especially internationally, in which folks have said, why are you going to call them? We've told you what they're doing. Why are you going to call them and ask them? And we tend to explain the purpose there, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, about what those calls, that ethical sort of side of journalism in terms of like calling people who are accused of something and or both sides, and where that line is, since we don't both sides, for instance, climate change, like we don't call somebody to tell us that, so there are lines and there are delineations, but maybe you can talk about that process a little more.
Well, first thing is that we call the other side for accountability, and to hold that person accountable, right? We have I say, look, these people are coming forward saying this, doesn't even not even an accusation, or saying this, what is your response? And that is holding the other side accountable, first of all and foremost. And it's good journalism to show both sides. Usually the other side in my case is the federal government, and they give some wishy-washy email response. Or if it's an accused, you're giving the other side a chance to respond. But in my opinion, I'll say it again, it's to hold that person accountable for what happened. There are times though when I'm doing stories, for example, about the fishery in the Atlantic region, and people are fishing for treaty rights. In mainstream media, the so-called other side is the non-Indigenous fishermen associations. But from an Indigenous perspective, the other side, it is nation to nation agreements from the treaties and the inherent rights, which is the Crown and now the federal government. So when I'm doing a fishing story, and plus those guys don't even talk to me, but when I do that story, I don't go to the Fishery Association, because the issue is treaty rights, inherent rights that were signed with the Crown. So the other side is the federal government. So from an Indigenous perspective, in my work, the other side might not be typically what mainstream media thinks. But yes, some people get upset. Why are you going to the other side? But most people don't. I find that, you know, if your stories are fair and accurate, people are good with that and people understand, you know. But I do explain, because a lot of people don't understand how media works.
And Graham, in terms of sort of talking to the other side, especially with folks who may be at risk or bringing information to you that might get them in trouble, how do you navigate that, and what do you recommend folks sort of think about when coming to a reporter with sensitive information that will require you to make some calls, but may also put somebody at risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of balance, you know, that's like Angel said, it's a necessary component to the story, and I have to give everyone, in especially if there's an allegation, an opportunity to respond, whether that's defend themselves or say nothing at all, or agree to do a interview and bring a counterpoint. So and quite frankly, that makes I think any particular claims or allegations, it usually makes them stronger in a story. I think if, you know, just for instance, if you're alleging somebody did something wrong and then I reach out to them for comment and they say that they don't want to talk to me, no comment. I mean, that does, you know, carry like a certain perspective in the public's eye. So anyway, that's really important. And then in terms of passing along sensitive information, I think it's just really for you as a source, if it's something or someone that you know who would want to pass along something, whether that's a whistleblower or just a former employee or a current employee, is just to be very intentional about how you pass along that information. So, you know, I know apps like Signal aren't, you know, the end all be all of security, and they have their own potential for harm too when you're passing along information. But just thinking about talking to journalists through, you know, some kind of encrypted form, or a lot of the times people will send me things from, you know, like a second email address or a third email address that they've started, you know, not or you know, also just a way around this too, is to you know, I talked a lot earlier about telling these stories in the framework that people understand, and one of those frameworks is rules or laws. And so if you can point me to a federal document, or like if you're a person who works for a government or something like that, and doesn't want to email me something directly because you could get in trouble, you can tell me what I can ask for through a records request. Knowing the names of specific documents is not something that I would necessarily think about or know about. So when I was a newspaper reporter and covered the prison system in Oklahoma, people within that department, the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, would tell me specific forms I needed to be asking for that I would have otherwise never known existed. And so that's also a way to give me information that's important without revealing your identity to someone like a superior, for instance.
And sort of drilling down, especially with some of the questions coming in about source safety and anonymity or safety protocols for individuals who may be facing criminalization or persecution. I think to some degree, we're not just talking about reaching out to random reporters. We're also talking a little bit about relationships too, correct? Like maybe you can expand a little bit on what role relationships with reporters that you can build might play in terms of being able to communicate this information.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, you know, looking around to see if there are reporters adjacent or covering the area, or maybe even the particular issue that you're that you want to reach out about, and doing it well. You know, that might not necessarily be the case, because you might be bringing to light an issue that the press hasn't discovered yet and really written about, or perhaps, you know, something that's happening within a broader issue that hasn't been illuminated on by the press yet. But in terms of relationship building, the people that I trust the most, who would never let me quote them, like always everything they tell me is on background or off the record. And for those of you that don't know the difference, on background means that I can say this. I can't attribute it to you, but I can say that I was told by, a lobbyist or a political consultant or something like that. And off the record is I'll tell you this, but you cannot publish or tie this to me in any way. This is just information for your ears only, and you have to verify it elsewhere. But yeah, anyway, so sorry, I lost the train of thought. Tristan, what was that last question? What was
Or just in terms of sort of like thinking about building a relationship with a
Oh,
reporter
yes,
in order to
sorry.
keep
Yeah,
yourself or your community safe.
I apologize. Yeah, relationship building. Yeah, but the ones that I trust the most are the ones that I talk to the most. There are all sorts of political consultants that work for tribal governments in DC who um, tell me things, those things happen, and so now when they tell me things, I generally believe what they have to say because they have a proven track record of telling me things that actually came to fruition or helping me understand an issue that uh, because they're an insider. And those aren't conversations that generally happen just one or two times. They're conversations that happen all the time. And honestly, that's what I look for in an interview. I don't really want to ask you a series of questions as much as I want to have a conversation with you where you do most of the talking. But we're learning from each other in a way, if that makes sense. And so I don't know. I think one of the reasons I enjoy this work is because I just like talking to people and learning about them. And so there's all sorts of attorneys, political consultants, um, people who work for tribal governments or nonprofits that work with tribal governments or whatever that I've talked to for years and have never quoted, but we have a really good rapport and I believe them and I trust the things that they say. And so I think one of the things that people worry about is you're talking to a journalist and being quoted and sounding silly or sounding dumb or just not wanting to go on the record. And, I'd say 99% of the conversations I have don't go on the record. They're just me learning and us building a relationship.
And Angel, I want to pass it to you, obviously, also in the context of keeping sources safe, especially folks that are in very dangerous situations. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how attendees can build trust and relationships with reporters as well.
One way to build trust is to, of course, be honest. I've gotten documents from different people over the years. One person gave me documents from an organization that he worked for. He resigned, and then he gave me the documents. Another person gave me documents, and it was at a risk to their job. And I've had information given to me that would risk a person's life. So, actually, the person whose life would have been at risk was, risking their life by this information I had not met before. They contacted me and they said, so and so, who is one of my contacts, who I know very, very well and have worked with a lot over the years. They said, this person told me I could trust you. I have this information, and it has to be anonymous because my life would be at risk. So developing contacts, you're networking through people and getting to know people. With me, when I'm doing a story, and someone is talking to me, and it is a conversation. And I tell them that nothing is on the record until I have the camera on and the microphone on. And even then, when I'm interviewing somebody, they say something and they go, oh, I can't say that, I don't use it. But I do explain to them that if they do talk to a mainstream media reporter, those practices might be different. I know some reporters where anything you say, they will put into the story. So I sort of give a disclaimer of how APTN works. But developing that relationship is based on trust, time, getting to know each other as a person as well, a little bit. And I don't know if mainstream reporters do that. And a commitment to each other. You know, it's an equal relationship. It's not not a hierarchy. And the contacts, relationships I have, they have the same passion to tell stories through an Indigenous perspective. You know, they care about stories and they care about their people and community and whatever is going on. And they contact me and they say, hey, this was said in some other article, or they say this is happening. But developing those relationships with a reporter, finding somebody that you like, even if they're non-Indigenous or mainstream media, but I can't speak for their practices. But it's a personal relationship, and it's totally built on trust. And that takes, a few conversations.
And yeah, you pointed to this as well too in terms of time. I mean, you're talking about multiple calls, meetings. I mean, this usually isn't like a one-off. This is, these are a number of different things that have to happen before trust is built, correct?
Yeah, and my producer's not here, but I pretty much work after hours as well. And people can contact me at any time. And other reporters I know who have really good connections with people, they're available on weekends and all the time with anything happening, and so there's that relationship. Like, it's not, to me, this isn't a job. So there's that relationship, and it's being kind to each other, and if you meet a reporter and have a good, listen to your gut feeling of, and if it feels like a good relationship, give it some time, look at their articles, look how they're covering stories. But definitely trust, I think, for journalism is what it's all about.
I mean, this also speaks, I think, to somebody who wants to be in touch with a reporter doing their homework, right? Like, for both of you, it's making sure you know who you're going to be talking to, what their work has looked like, etc. But I also, this is also a little bit about, to some degree, like reach and audience, right? Like, you can go to the New York Times, for instance, where you're going to have a 27 million person audience, but you may have reporters that have no idea what they're talking, they've never done this kind of story before, never done this reporting before, don't know how to interact with Indigenous sources, and may get the story very, very wrong. Versus going to a smaller outlet that, even like Grist, feel free to contact us. That has a smaller footprint of like 2.5 million readers, but we have a dedicated Indigenous Affairs desk. We have people that focus on this, have deep expertise on this. I mean, this again speaks to sort of doing your homework. And do you have any tips in terms of thinking about where you're going to put your energy if you're trying to get a reporter's attention?
Yeah, and our TV stories are posted on YouTube, and our web stories are posted on our website and online and social media. So thank goodness for the internet, so smaller outlets can reach a larger audience. And if it is a story that is of interest to mainstream media, they'll pick it up and kind of do a follow or a copy, sort of based on an Indigenous story. So, thank goodness we're not from the days of the delivering newspapers house to house. The internet does help us reach far and wide.
Yeah. I know we've got about 10 minutes left here, but I want to also throw a couple of more questions that are coming in. Graham, I'll send this one over to you here. What are your thoughts about sort of overcoming or avoiding sort of the ghettoizing or siloing of Indigenous focused stories when they're reaching a broader audience, especially since you're working in a mainstream newsroom? Like, how do you navigate that, and how can your sources navigate that as well too?
I think it's totally acceptable for you when you're first building a relationship with a journalist who you're not sure if they understand the perspective of the community that is affected and might even stereotype them. I think it's perfectly acceptable for you to get an understanding of their understanding in that first conversation with them. So asking them questions about what they know, what voices and perspectives they're familiar with, like, and I mean, I'm not saying you have to like grill them. I'm just saying you can ask them like, how much knowledge where do I need to start to educate you on what's happening right now? And if you feel like that starting point is explaining, the imbalance of equity because of colonialism, then maybe this isn't the right reporter for you, or maybe you just have to accept that you're going to have to. There's going to be a lot of translation exhaustion, and you're going to have to explain some of these concepts. So that's up to you as a source. What kind of time commitment and that you want to make with each reporter. But I think just setting that base knowledge for yourself about what kind of person and what kind of experience to this issue that they're bringing, like that's something that you can do as a source. And so yeah, and I think something else is helpful is, I know I say this a lot, but again, like putting it in a framework that they understand, and but also giving the journalists an opportunity for impact, is basically kind of saying, if this issue is at hand, who are the people, who are the leaders that are responsible for it, and responsible for regulating it or providing oversight or prosecuting someone for breaking the law, because I think as a reporter, it's much easier for me, and maybe other journalists too. It's if instead of focusing on the trauma of what's happening, it's focusing on accountability for the people who are responsible, or whether that's because they made it happen or because it's their duty to take care of the aftermath. And so I think those are the stories that can provide greater impact, and it also it takes the focus off the harm that's being done. Because, just to be frank, a lot of journalists, especially national reporters like myself, parachute into communities, Indigenous communities, when something traumatic happens, and cover the impacts, and less of them are focusing on the people who are responsible. And so I think anything you can do to help a journalist push in that direction is probably going to be beneficial for you.
I want to address a conversation I'm also seeing in the chat here about story previews. And just quickly for both of y'all, obviously this differs from country to country in terms of being able to preview stories before they go to publication. But Angel, maybe you can start and just talk about what that process looks like for APTN.
Yes. People do not preview our stories before we print, publish, or go to air. That is a journalistic ethics policy. It's very common in Canada. So people do not have access before they publish. And that is for transparency, and to be accountable that the story is written and composed by a journalist with professional training. And if a person reads a story or the script before, that could be seen as a person having impact on the news reporting. So we're trained professionally to be fair and to have both sides, and to be honest, and not to stereotype or make anyone look bad or make fun of. And that is APTN. So people do not look at stories before they're published. That is a company journalistic ethics policy.
And Grant, just briefly, same with AP.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Tristan?
With previewing stories, allowing people.
Oh, yes, with preview stories. Apologies, I had to respond to my editor really quickly. Yeah, we similarly cannot allow previews of the stories. Something that I do a lot of the time, that this is not the norm for most journalists, especially ones on really tight deadlines. But if I'm working on a story that I think has a lot of allegations or accusations or ins and outs or like lots of details, where the stakes are high, especially if it becomes to legal matters, I send an email before the story publishes, basically just kind of detailing every fact that pertains to you that I'm planning to include in the story, so that you have a final opportunity to, correct me if I'm wrong, give me any kind of, refute anything. If someone's making an accusation against you, and I've interviewed you because you say that it's not true, I'll give you a detailed list of all the things about that are going to be included in this story, so that you have an opportunity to say, no, I refute that. Actually, you've mischaracterized that. Oh, one thing you forgot about that, this tiny detail here, or actually that sweater wasn't brown, it was blue. Those things are really, just every detail that I can think of. So, like I said, that's not normal. And it's not necessarily, I mean, you could ask the journalist to do that. They may or may not have the time or the desire to do that. But if it's a really important issue, I try to do that as much as I can, so that we're crystal clear.
In terms of, I mean, at least at Grist, a lot of times what we will do is go back to a source and talk to them about their quotes. We will sometimes actually read back quotes that are going to go into the story to make sure that we're characterizing right. All of our interviews are always recorded. We get your permission before recording, but we also want to safeguard our reporters too. But I think for folks that are attendees here, there are some areas that I think you can talk to the reporters about and maybe even negotiate around a little bit, but it also depends on country to country. I know in Europe, for instance, it's quite common for reporters to send all of the quotes they use from you to you first before like publication. So it's not unusual for that to happen, but you should definitely get that information sort of before embarking on any further sort of relationships, if that's something that you're concerned about at all. I guess as we're sort of coming to a close here, I want to sort of ask a little bit about like Angel, we'll start with you. Maybe you can talk to me about a memorable story recently that you covered and why it really stood out to you, from a question from readers here.
A memorable story. Maybe Graham can go first. I need to think about that one.
Like something recently, or
Sure, something last year or something that's particularly memorable that you're really proud of.
Oh, like personal reporting? Is that what we're talking about, or something? Oh, okay. I was thinking of something like just in the news cycle.
No, something you've done. Yeah. Why was it one of your favorites? What stood out to you about that?
So, and this is not a story that is like, investigative or covering corruption or any like criminal allegations or anything, but my tribe and the four other tribes that from our area of the country that were removed to Oklahoma have a tradition called wild onion dinners, where we pick green onions are the first thing that grows at the beginning of spring, and one of the first things that you can eat. And we have wild onion dinners all over the reservations in eastern Oklahoma. And it's something that you can find written about in the Oklahoma Historical Society archives and things like that. But it was just this really special annual tradition that I love, that I had seen, never really seen anything written about it by a mainstream media outlet. And so the AP paid me to go to 4 or 5 different wild onion dinners over the course of 2 months and write about them. And we're having them right now again. It's been a year since I wrote that story. But it was just really personally fulfilling. I got to include a lot of traditional words, like our word for grandmother, some Muskogee Creek words in that story that the Associated Press had never published. Associated Press is 175 years old and had never published some of these words in our traditional language. And so it was just a really personally satisfying story for me. I had a really good time reporting it. And there was a lot of really interesting characters. So
Nice. Angel?
A story I did recently is with the fisheries going on, and the Mi'kmaq here in this territory are asserting their treaty rights to fish without a colonial license. But when they go fishing, I went with them, and we went at night, and they had the headbands with the camera on, and it was dark, and they were on the banks of the river. So filming it was quite beautiful. And it was about 60 people from one Mi'kmaq nation. And it's very controversial, of course, and this is going on for I don't know, 30 years. But the story I did was it was an elder was there with the community. There was children there. The fishermen were teaching their youth how to fish and do this, and and everyone was kind of on edge, waiting if the Department of Fisheries officers were going to come and arrest people, which they've done before, which I've witnessed. But it was they went out as a community to show that this is their tradition, and they're passing it on to children, and they're very passionate about it. And I interviewed a grandmother, an elder fisherman, and a younger fisherman. On his way, fisheries officers just seized all of his gear, and filming fishing and at night, and the shots were really beautiful. So that story was had a lot of passion, and it was beautiful. Everybody was happy, a little bit on edge, and that was it for the story. So actually, in that story, you can say I did not interview the other side. I mean, I sent an email to the feds. What is your response to this? Because they never interview, they just give a statement, and they said, we're working to establish these rights, but it's still illegal. But really, the story was about the community and asserting their traditional practices. And it was really nice, and other stories in mainstream media was like, oh, it's controversial, and there's the fishermen and the fisheries officers and the commercial guys are all against it, and this was a really nice story to show that this is what it's really about. It's not about breaking federal laws or anything. So that was beautiful.
As we wrap up here, there was one other question that came through about, is a press release at all useful for UNPFII side events coverage? And we covered a little bit of this earlier, but I'll just kind of hop in here too with folks. Yes, these press announcements and press releases are really helpful for us, but it's only if there's enough time to get to them. So if we find out there's a press event tomorrow, it's 90% sure we're not going to be able to cover it. We're usually looking, if you can give us a week, for instance, that really helps a lot. And this is where things like an embargoed press release is something that you can send to all three of us here, in which we're, that gives us the jump to be able to say, hey, in 2 weeks, we know this is going to happen. This gives us 2 weeks to be able to do our research, make some calls, talk to you, etc. 24 hours, it makes it incredibly hard to cover anything, and usually that means it won't happen. As you extend that sort of timeline, it becomes a lot easier for us to really consider this. So what we'll do here is we'll drop a link into how to contact all of us. Again, this training that we're doing now will be during the permanent forum, where we will do a more or less a full day training, where not only will we be having a lot of these conversations with additional reporters, but we're also going to be working more or less one-on-one with you if you want to sign up. It's a free training. We just need you to sign up, and then obviously attend also, because it's limited attendance to take part in that. But again, you'll be paired up with these reporters. You'll be able to talk through stories that you're thinking about or wanting to get in front of reporters, workshop some of the best language to be able to get those across. We even do role playing in which you are like at a party and you run into a reporter and you find out they're a reporter and you want to tell them, this thing that you're hoping to get coverage on, right? Like we really try to make sure that you're comfortable with being able to communicate those ideas in the most efficient way possible and work with you in very small groups to make sure that happens. This year, I can also just let you know that at the Permanent Forum, we have a number of outlets that are coming in. So we have reporters from High Country News, Manga Bay, Indian Country Today, APTN News, Whakata Maori, Indigenous News, Osage News, and the Associated Press and Grist as well. So there are a lot of reporters covering a lot of different parts of the world and a lot of different issues that will be available. And again, if you want to get a hold of us early, start having those conversations with us early about events that you may have going on, interventions that you're going to be making, etc. These are things that we can start having as early as today, if that's something that you're interested in to help drive coverage. We're interested in getting stories out. We're interested in meeting you. We're interested in doing more trainings with you or just meeting at Permanent Forum and talking about what you're working on. There's a story tip form in the chat there. It's a pretty simple form you can fill out. Again, you'll see at the beginning there, if you have something that's sensitive, we ask that you sort of think about different like security protocols and reaching us through that pass mail email, which is an encrypted email address that you can reach us. We also ask that you don't add it to any of your mailing list because it is only really for security communications. If it gets clogged up, we have a hard time seeing stuff from people who actually need to reach us. But the rest of the form is there so you can add that kind of information. And that information goes directly to all the reporters that I mentioned that'll be at the Permanent Forum. Angel, Graham, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to sort of put out, Angel?
I just wanted to mention one thing at the Permanent Forum because I'm running around with a camera and tripod. All my interviews need to be booked kind of ahead of time, and I need to let the UN media know my schedule and where I will be. And when I'm filming, I have to be accompanied by a representative from the UN media office. Yeah, we get embargoed press releases all the time, and I promise I won't tell anybody, and that would help very, very much. Thank you.
And Graham, last thoughts?
Just to reiterate that we like to have conversations and talk to people, and that most of the things that we talk about don't make the news. So just think of journalists as like a lot of the people that I talk to regularly are really just connectors. They connect me to experts, ideas, issues, people. And if that's something that sounds interesting to you, then you should reach out and get to know us and the journalists in your area that cover the things that you cover. So yeah.
Cool. Diana, I'll pass it back over to you. And again, we'll have all of this information going out. I think we can send it out by email. That was a request here, but yes, we've got ways to contact us. And then if you'd like to sign up for the fuller events in terms of communications training, we'll have that information for you as well too. And we thank you again for your time.
So please.
Yeah.
Right. I hope my connection is okay right now. So I was just thanking everybody, and I would like you to follow the Indigenous Journalists Association, Grist Project, Access Indigenous Partnership, Cultural Survival, and Canadian Commission UNESCO to learn more about our work. We will share our websites in the chat, and you can always look for us in the digital platforms. So as Tristan said, if you would like to attend the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, please visit the Indigenous Media Zone during the first week of the forum. It will be located in the UN Correspondents Association room on the 3rd floor of the Secretariat building. And one more time, we invite you to attend the in-person Share Your Story training on April 24 that will be available in English, just in English this year, but hopefully in the future we will have more languages. You can see in the screen the details, but you can also email us. And yeah, we hope to see you there. And thank you one more time for being here. And until next time.